Look guys, you might as well watch all The Rock's movies now because when he's president in like 20 years, you're gonna want to get all the jokes. Don't laugh, that's at least 70% more plausible than it was last year. Wouldn't even be the first president to be in the WWE Hall of Fame, as it turns out. The original Jumanji is one of those 90s nostalgia movies where the original appeal and the fact that people are still big into it is kind of surprising when you go back and watch it. It's not bad, but it's probably not the classic you might remember it being, and it's also a weirdly dark, downbeat movie for something that was mainly aimed at kids at the time, right down to starring Robin Williams, but keeping him in somber, serious drama mode for almost the whole movie, even though it was a big effects-driven fantasy movie. Bottom line, Jumanji might not be a great film, but it's possible that it owes its longevity to being such a strange film. Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle is strange too, but only in as far as it's connected to the original movie. On its own, it's a pretty by-the-numbers action comedy nominally aimed at kids and teens that takes disappointingly few risks with its own seemingly fertile fantasy premise, making the strangest thing about it the fact that it is, canonically, Jumanji 2, despite having a completely different tone, storyline, setup, and cast of characters than the original. It's kind of like if Bill Murray had been playing Peter Venkman in Scrooged and Groundhog Day 2, but otherwise nothing about those movies had been different, and also if they'd been kind of average and instantly forgettable. In any case, the premise of Jumanji was that there's this haunted board game vaguely themed around old-timey jungle adventure fantasy stuff that unleashes killer monster versions of exotic animals, plants, and weather events in the name of teaching bratty children a monkey's paw lesson about not appreciating their parents or their everyday lives, or it's actually kind of murky on that end, but that was the basic idea of the first movie. The sequel, Jumanji, has rebooted itself into a retro video game console that pulls 4 high school kids of disparate backgrounds into the jungle world of Jumanji itself, with the central hook being that they're also transformed into the game characters they chose to play as, and they all manage to pick the ironic opposite of their own personalities. So the weak nerd becomes a badass hero played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the big jock becomes Kevin Hart as a sniveling sidekick, the shy, Hollywood-playing bookworm girl is stuck in the body of Karen Gillan as a cartoonishly underdressed Lara Croft type, and the vapid, Instagram-addicted popular girl is now Jack Black. And if you're recalling that this is basically the same meaningfully mismatched character class joke premise as the old Dungeons & Dragons cartoon, you are probably too old for this movie. Either way, it's an inspired premise for an action comedy, even if it has kind of fuck all to do with anything in the original Jumanji was even remotely about. But it doesn't really seem to have inspired the filmmakers to do much. Everyone kind of has exactly one good thing and one bad thing to learn about themselves by inhabiting the literal opposite of their real-life bodies. The trapped in a video game conceit is only meaningfully exploited for attention-extending life system, and to handwave the plot progression just being a series of contrived mini-episode levels, and the whole thing is pretty much predictable from start to finish. Which is not to say it's not funny or suitably entertaining within its own narrow parameters, just that it's almost completely forgettable outside of a few well-told jokes and the noteworthiness that it's Jack Black and Karen Gillan who have the most interesting dynamic and payoff in terms of which one has to learn not to be a judgmental jerk and which one has to learn to realize unrecognized potential. It's not much, but when you consider how easy it would be for a middle-aged dude comedian doing an impression of what bugs him about teenage girls to be a really grating concept, it's actually quite a relief that it's not. It's also bizarre that the sequel to Jumanji almost completely abandons the killer animal angle that was essentially the entire focus of the previous movie. There's only a couple of jungle creature scenes here, and the main threat has been upgraded to generically warlord-ish human bad guys, and I'm not sure if this is because our view of scary stuff in the jungle has evolved or if they're just trying to save money, but either way it leaves the whole thing feeling kind of empty and generic, even more so than it already is. Now look, I'm not necessarily someone who's been waiting 20 years to find out what happened next in the Jumanji universe, but I don't need to be to see that this is an unworthy successor. Ultimately, it feels like the kind of thing you make just because you think the brand name is worth enough on its face to not really need a full movie behind it. And even though he's more capable than almost anyone else of elevating middling material, even The Rock can't save this one. 2 stars, it's more forgettable than bad, but if you skip it, you won't have to bother forgetting it. I still hope Rampage is good, though.